Your legacy is preserved in the amber glow of the choices you make today, waiting to be revealed in the future. Explore the powerful narratives of fate and the lessons that define who we are destined to become. Click subscribe now and build your own eternal cinematic legacy today. What my son did not know was that everything he had, the office on the 14th floor, the company truck with his name on the door, the credit line that never seemed to run dry, every single bit of it traced back to decisions I made before he was old enough to shave. I am Walter Haynes, and what I am about to tell you is the story of how I spent 43 years building something from nothing, watched my own son use it to erase me, and then made sure he understood exactly who he was dealing with. I want you to understand something before I go any further. I am not a man who cries easily. I grew up in Clarksburg, West Virginia, in a house where the pipes froze every January, and my father worked double shifts at the glass plant just to keep the lights on. I watched that man come home with his hands split open from the cold and never once complain about it. That is the standard I was raised against. So when I tell you that there was a Tuesday afternoon last March when I sat in my truck in the parking lot of a Cracker Barrel off Interstate 79 and could not stop the tears from coming, I need you to understand how far things had gone. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this really started. I started Haynes Construction in 1987 with a used flatbed truck, a toolbox I bought at a yard sale, and $11,000 I had saved working every weekend for 3 years straight. My wife Patricia was 7 months pregnant with our son Trevor at the time. She worked the front desk at a dentist's office until 2 weeks before she delivered, and when people asked her if she was nervous about us starting a business with a baby on the way, she would just smile and say, "Walter doesn't start things he isn't going to finish." That woman believed in me the way very few people ever get believed in. We grew slowly. A deck here, a bathroom remodel there. By the time Trevor started kindergarten, I had 4 crews running and a real office with a receptionist named Doris, who made the best coffee I have ever tasted in my life. By the time Trevor graduated high school, Haynes Construction had completed over 200 residential and commercial projects across 3 counties. We were not rich, but we were solid. We were the kind of company people called because they knew we would show up, do the work right, and stand behind it. Patricia passed away 9 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 12 weeks from diagnosis to the day I held her hand for the last time. She was 61 years old. I am not going to spend time on that here because I do not have the words for it and I never will. What I will say is that after she was gone, I threw myself into the business harder than I ever had, and I also made a decision that I now recognize was the first domino in everything that followed. Trevor was 34 when his mother died. He had been working at the company for 6 years by then, starting in the field and working his way into project management. He was smart enough, and the crews respected him, and I thought I genuinely believed that bringing him in closer after Patricia was gone was the right thing to do for both of us. I made him vice president of operations. I gave him a salary that made my accountant raise both eyebrows, and I started letting him run the day-to-day while I stepped back a little. I told myself I was grooming him to take over. I told myself Patricia would have wanted this. I told myself a lot of things. What I was actually doing was handing the keys to someone who had begun, somewhere along the way, to believe that the kingdom had always been his. The changes were gradual. That is the thing about a slow rot. You don't smell it until it has gone very deep. The first thing I noticed was the way Trevor started talking about the company in meetings. Not "Dad built this" or "We've been doing it this way since the beginning." It was always my vision and the direction I'm taking us and what I need from this team going forward. Small thing. I let it go. Then he redecorated the main office without asking me, pulled out the original wood paneling that Patricia had picked out herself and replaced it with that gray, concrete-look stuff that every corporate office uses now. Threw away the framed photos of our first big commercial job. I came in one Monday morning and felt like a stranger in my own building. I brought it up at lunch. Trevor looked at me the way a professor looks at a student who asked a question that should be obvious and said, "Dad, we can't look like a mom-and-pop shop anymore. We're trying to attract enterprise clients." I nodded. I let it go. Over the following year, he hired 3 people I had never interviewed and fired 2 foremen who had been with us for over a decade. Good men. Men who used to go to our 4th of July cookouts. I found out about the firings from one of them, Bobby Ciccone, who called me on my cell phone because he didn't know what else to do. He had 3 kids and a mortgage, and Trevor had let him go by email on a Friday afternoon. By email. After 11 years, I called Trevor that same evening. He told me Bobby was resistant to the new operational model and that he needed people who were aligned with the growth strategy. He used the word aligned 4 times in that one phone call. When I said that a man who gave us 11 years deserved to be looked in the eye, Trevor said, "Dad, this is exactly why I need you to trust me on the business decisions. You're too personally attached to people who aren't performing." That was the first time I felt something cold move through me. Not anger exactly, something more like recognition. Like when you are driving at night and you see something at the edge of your headlights, and you are not quite sure what it is yet, but some part of you already knows it is not good. I started paying closer attention. It was Doris, my old receptionist, now working in accounts, who first put the real thread in my hand. She came to my office on a Thursday morning and closed the door behind her, which she never did, and she set a printed spreadsheet on my desk and stood there with her hands clasped in front of her like she was in church. She said, "Walter, I don't know if this means anything, but these numbers have been bothering me for a long time and I didn't know who to talk to." I looked at the spreadsheet. It was a vendor payment log. Certain invoices, not many, maybe 8 or 9 over the past 14 months were flagged. The vendor names were ones I did not recognize. The amounts were not outrageous on their own. 11,000 here, 17,000 there. But Doris had done something careful. She had pulled the corresponding project files, and in each case, the work those vendors were supposedly paid for was either already covered by another invoice or had never been requested in the first place. I kept my face very still. I thanked Doris and told her she had done the right thing coming to me. After she left, I sat at my desk for a long time looking at those numbers. That weekend, I drove out to see my old friend Earl Grady, who had practiced business law in Morgantown for 30-something years before he retired. We sat on his back porch, and I spread the papers out on the table between us, and he looked at them for a long time without saying anything. Then he looked up at me and said, "Walter, do you know what these vendor addresses are?" I told him I hadn't checked yet. He picked up his phone, typed for a moment, and then turned the screen toward me. One of the vendor addresses was a mailbox rental store on the east side of town. Another was a vacant lot. A third was a residential address that, when Earl searched the property records, turned out to be a house registered to a woman named Sherilyn Boyce, which meant nothing to me until Earl pulled up a Facebook profile and showed me a photo of Sherilyn Boyce standing next to my son at what appeared to be a rooftop bar in Pittsburgh. I drove home in complete silence. I did not confront Trevor that night. I did not confront him the next week. I want you to understand that this was not weakness, and it was not fear. It was the exact opposite. Because in that moment, sitting in the dark of my truck in Earl's driveway, I made a decision that was the clearest and coldest decision of my entire life. I was not going to have a conversation. I was not going to give him a chance to explain or to hide things or to lawyer up before I understood the full picture. I was going to find out everything first, and then I was going to act. I called Earl on Monday and asked him who he trusted for a forensic accounting review. He gave me 2 names. I hired the first one by Wednesday. What came back over the next 6 weeks was worse than I had imagined, and also, in some terrible way, more clarifying than anything I had ever experienced. The shell vendor scheme was the smallest part of it. Trevor had also taken out a line of credit in the company's name, a $240,000 line of credit using documents that bore my signature but that I had never signed. My name, forged, on a bank application. He had drawn down $180,000 of it over 8 months. He had also been running personal expenses through the company accounts for years. Car payments, vacations, a home theater installation, $4,300 at a jewelry store that, based on the dates, corresponded to a weekend he told me he was at a project management conference in Columbus. I did not sleep well during those weeks. Not because I was frightened, but because the mind has to do a certain kind of reckoning when it discovers that someone you raised and loved and gave everything to has been systematically stealing from you. Not just the money, stealing the narrative. Rewriting who built what and who it belonged to. Trevor had a son, My grandson Lucas, who was 8 years old, and had his grandmother's eyes and his great-grandfather's stubborn chin, and who loved building things with the wooden block set I had given him for Christmas 2 years ago. Lucas was the one piece of all of this that made my chest hurt in a way that had nothing to do with anger. His mother, Trevor's wife Renee, was a decent woman who I genuinely believe had no part in any of this. She worked as a nurse and she loved her son, and I think at some level she knew her husband was not the person he pretended to be. But she was in it the way people get in things too far, too long, too much woven together. The week after the forensic accountant delivered his full report to Earl and me, I called my bank and had a very long meeting with a vice president I had known for 20 years. I made some changes to certain accounts. I signed some documents that had been prepared very carefully over the preceding month. I had a conversation with my estate attorney that took most of an afternoon, and then I went to the office on a Monday morning like any other Monday morning. Trevor was in his office, my office, the one with the view of the river that I had always planned to sit in when I got older and slower and ready to just watch things from a high place. He was on the phone and he held up one finger when I appeared in the doorway, the way you signal to a delivery driver to wait outside. I stood there and I looked at him, really looked at him, and I tried to find the boy who used to fall asleep in my lap during baseball games, and I found I could not locate him anywhere in the man behind that desk. He finished his call and leaned back and said, "Dad, I didn't know you were coming in today. Is everything okay?" I told him everything was fine. I told him I just wanted to see the place. We talked for about 20 minutes about nothing in particular, a project in Fairmont that was behind schedule, a supplier issue, nothing. And then I stood up and I said, "I'm proud of what we've built here, Trevor. I want you to remember that." He looked at me with an expression I could not fully read and said, "Thanks, Dad, that means a lot." I drove home, and I kept driving, and I did not stop driving until I was 2 states away. Now I need to tell you about the phone call, because you have to understand what happened before I left and what came after. 3 days before that Monday morning, I had been at the office late, going through some files in what used to be the storage room before Trevor converted it into a server room. I heard Trevor on the phone in his office. The door was not fully closed. I was not eavesdropping intentionally, but once I heard what I heard, I stood very still, and I listened to all of it. He was talking to someone I don't know who, some name I didn't recognize, and he was talking about me. He said, "The old man is going to have to step back completely within the next 6 months. I don't care how we do it," he said. "If he won't do it voluntarily, I'll have Earl draw up a competency challenge." He said my name the way you say the name of a problem you are solving, not a person you love. And then he said something that I have turned over in my mind every day since. He said, "He's been showing up here acting like he still runs the place, and it's embarrassing in front of clients. He needs to understand that this is my company now. It was always going to be mine. He just got there first. 43 years, $11,000, and a used flatbed truck, and my wife working a front desk, 7 months pregnant. A competency challenge. He was going to use the legal system to have me declared unfit so he could take formal control. I walked out of that building without making a sound, got in my truck, and sat in the parking lot of a Cracker Barrel off Interstate 79, and I wept. Not for long, maybe 10 minutes. And then I dried my face, and I called Earl, and I said, "We need to move faster." What I had put in place was this. The forensic accountant's report had already been submitted to the state attorney general's office by Earl on my behalf 3 weeks earlier. The forged signature on the bank application had been sent to the FBI field office in Clarksburg, which handles financial crimes. The $240,000 line of credit had been flagged by the bank itself after my conversation with the vice president, and they had opened their own internal fraud investigation. I had also, with the help of my estate attorney, restructured the ownership of Haynes Construction. I was, and had always been, the sole owner of record. Trevor had a title, but not equity, something he had never bothered to verify in writing because he had assumed family was enough. The company, along with its accounts, its contracts, its equipment, and its real estate holdings, was placed into a trust. The trust was managed by Earl. I was the beneficiary. Trevor was not named anywhere in it. The line of credit he had fraudulently obtained was frozen by the bank the day I left. The shell vendor accounts had already been traced, and the records seized. By the time Trevor walked into the office that Tuesday morning and sat down at his desk and picked up his phone, there were 2 FBI agents and a representative from the state AG's office waiting in the conference room. Earl called me that evening to let me know how it went. I was sitting on a porch in Asheville, North Carolina, at a rental house I had booked for 6 weeks. I had a cup of coffee, and the mountains were doing what mountains do in the evening, which is remind you that the world is older than any of your problems. When Earl told me that Trevor had been taken in for questioning, I didn't feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that. What I felt was tired. A deep, clean tiredness, like after a job that took everything you had but that you finished properly. I also felt afraid. Not for myself. For Lucas. I had thought about this more than anything else in the entire preceding months. That little boy had nothing to do with any of it. He was 8 years old with his grandmother's eyes and a box of wooden blocks, and a grandfather who loved him and who had just, from his point of view, vanished without explanation. I had written Lucas a letter. I had given it to Renee's mother, a woman named Sylvia, who I had always liked and who I trusted, and I had asked her to hold it until Lucas was old enough to read it and understand it. In the letter, I told him that nothing that happened between his father and me had anything to do with how I felt about him. I told him that Patricia, his grandmother, who he never got to meet, would have loved him with everything she had. I told him that when he was ready to find me, I would be findable. I signed it Grandpa Walt. What I did not know, what I couldn't have known when I drove away, was that Renee had not known about the fraud. All of it, when it came out on her too. She filed for divorce 6 weeks after Trevor was charged. She called me from a Target parking lot on a Thursday afternoon, and she was composed in the way that people are composed when they have already cried themselves out and have arrived somewhere on the other side of it. She said, "Walter, I want you to know that Lucas asks about you every day." I drove back from Asheville the following Monday. The trial took 11 months. I am not going to walk you through all of it because some of it is still a matter of legal record and some of it is simply too long. What I will tell you is the part that mattered most to me, which was the afternoon. I sat in that courtroom and watched my son's attorney try to argue that the competency challenge Trevor had been planning proved that Trevor had sincerely believed he was the one rightfully running the company, and that everything he did was in good faith. The judge, a woman in her late 50s named Judge Paulette Okafor, who had clearly heard every variety of this kind of argument and was not impressed by any of them, looked at that attorney over the top of her glasses and said, "Counsel, the evidence shows your client forged his elderly father's signature on a federal banking document. The court is not interested in his theory of ownership. Please sit down." I looked at Trevor when she said that. He was staring at the table in front of him, and his jaw was tight, and he looked like a man who had expected his whole life to be told that he was exceptional, and was only now, for the first time, receiving a different verdict. Trevor was convicted on 4 counts, including wire fraud and identity theft. He was sentenced to 38 months and ordered to make full restitution to the company. I did not feel satisfied when the sentence was read. I want to be clear about that too. I felt something more complicated. I felt grief for the person he could have been and wasn't. I felt something like relief, but relief mixed with loss, the way you feel when a wound finally closes over and you know it will leave a scar. I felt proud of myself for the first time in a long time. Not for what happened to Trevor, for the fact that I had not let it break me. Haynes Construction is still running. I promoted a project manager named Darnell Washington to Vice President of Operations. Darnell has been with the company for 14 years, started as a laborer at 22, got his project management certification on nights and weekends while working full-time, and never once asked for anything he hadn't earned. The day I told him about the promotion, he stood in my office and said, "Walter, are you sure?" And I said, "Darnell, I should have done this years ago. That is the truest thing I said in all of this." I moved back to Clarksburg from Asheville in the spring. I rent a house now. Not the one Patricia and I raised Trevor in. That house has too much in it that I am not ready to sit with every day. This house has a good back porch, and a yard where Lucas comes every other Saturday when Renee brings him over. He is 9 now, and he is building a birdhouse. He asked me last month if I would teach him how to use a circular saw when he is older, and I told him I would absolutely do that, and that his great-grandfather would have thought he was something else. I want to say one more thing, and then I am done. People ask me, well-meaning people, People who hear pieces of this story, they ask me if I regret not confronting Trevor earlier, not sitting him down when the signs were small and saying, "Son, what is happening here? Who are you becoming?" And I understand why they ask that. I ask it myself sometimes, usually late at night when the house is quiet. But here is what I know. I did confront him, just not with words. I confronted him with 43 years of what it actually takes to build something. I confronted him with Doris, who came to my office because she still believed in the right thing. I confronted him with Earl, who had known me long enough to know I was worth helping. I confronted him with every foreman and every laborer and every client who built this company with me, whose names are in the records, whose work is still standing in houses and offices all over 3 counties. That is what I left him. The truth of where it all came from. He just got there first, he said. Like arriving is the same as building. Like showing up to something already made and putting your name on it is the same as making it. It isn't. It never was. And now he knows that. My name is Walter Haynes. I started with $11,000 and a used truck and a wife who believed in me. I am 67 years old and I am not finished yet. And to anyone watching this who has worked their whole life to build something, only to watch someone take it and call it theirs, I want you to hear me clearly. Be patient, be thorough, write everything down. Trust the people who have always shown up. And don't mistake the silence of a man who is watching for the silence of a man who has given up. Those are 2 very different silences. I know because I have lived both. And I know exactly which one is coming for you, Trevor. It already did.